All right, hey everyone. This is Tuesday, January 7th, 2020, and this is the weekly meeting of Kubernetes SIG Docs. Jim and I are your co-chairs. Happy New Year. All right, let's start as we do by welcoming folks who are here for the first time. I see a bunch of folks that are new to me. At least. So let me go in alphabetical order here over in the chat list. Ray Lejano, welcome.
Hello, good morning, afternoon. It's my first meeting with SIG Docs. Work for RXM. We are a Kubernetes training and consulting firm, and want to be more involved with and to contribute to Kubernetes and cloud native communities. So I'm here. I'll probably be a fly on the wall just to see where I can add value.
Awesome, welcome. Glad to have you. All right, David K. Hello.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from?
Oh, this is David Keeperos. I've been on the on these calls. I think this is my 10th one.
Okay. In that case, welcome to you.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. Let's go to updates and reminders. I would tell you who this week's PR Wrangler is, except we don't have one. I would tell you who next week's PR Wrangler is, but we don't have one. There had been some talk in December about putting together the new PR Wrangler schedule. That still needs to happen in a big way. I'm going to jump the gun a little bit and go straight to process. Let's talk first about PR Wrangler shifts. So we need to put together the PR Wrangler shift. And not to rehash December's meeting, this is the one part of being a SIG chair that I absolutely hate, is putting together the PR Wrangler shifts. It's not that hard. I just don't love doing it. Brad Topol.
I believe in December, in an exhausted state, that I agreed that if we waited till January, I would be willing to take over this role. And here it's time to cash that check. It is January. If I could just get the list of who are the people we're allowed to schedule and the pointer to where it is, I will start scheduling. And if I do a horrible job, my wonderful colleagues will help me to get better, I'm sure.
Thank you, Brad. Cheers.
Happy New Year.
So, Happy New Year. It's easy to, with the set of PR Wranglers is wholly contiguous with the set of English content approvers.
Okay.
So you can find that list by looking in the website repo. And in the top level of the repo, there is a file, all caps, owners _ aliases.
Mm-hmm.
And actually here, let me share my screen really quick just so it's easy to see. So we are in the Kubernetes website repo. And here's the owners _ aliases file. And then if you scroll down to line 42, you get this block here. SIG Docs EN owners. And this is the pool of approvers for English content. And that's the pool that you that whoever puts together the PR Wrangler schedule uses to populate that list.
Okay. And we just have a
And,
Google Doc we put that in, is that correct?
so we put it in the wiki, and I stopped
Okay.
sharing my screen too soon. Let me share that again. If we go to the wiki, you can see right over here, contributing to K8s Docs, there's the PR Wranglers. And usually when I put this together in the past, I found that it's easiest to do it in like 6 months at a time, just because the pool is so large. It's easiest to wrangle, like, because we have a wealth of approvers, thankfully, and so not everyone gets a shift every quarter. So it's easiest to sort of wrangle the buys if you're looking at it 6 months at a time. But yeah, it's here in the wiki.
Okay, cool. So I'll just let everyone know that I did not get a holiday card from anyone on this call, and as a result, all the owners will now have an opportunity to be scheduled as a wrangler out of spite. Had this one of
I'm
you
not an
said
owner
it.
then.
Mine got lost in the mail, Brad. I'm sorry.
Jim was good. I trust him. He's fine. No, I'll take care of this. I'll do this later today, Zach.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And while we're on the subject of approvers, Tim Bannister has nominated or expressed interest in being an approver for English content.
2 thumbs way up.
Yep, my New Year's resolution.
Fantastic.
Well, between Jim and myself, I think we have an enthusiastic vote. So let's see, it says PR 18398. I'm going to say that this looks very good to me and approve it right now. All right.
Cool.
Welcome, Tim, as the newest Docs English approver.
Woo! When are we going to light the fireworks and start the parade?
Real talk. If I had fireworks, if I had a brass band, we would trot one out.
I'm a big fan of fireworks.
Yeah, and all joking aside, Tim, you've been great at approving or not approving, but reviewing, and been instrumental in SIG Docs success over the past year. And I think it's awesome to see you come on board as an approver.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Definitely.
Yes.
Been very impressed.
Yeah. Very glad to have you. All right. Let's see. Just from a repo health perspective, when I looked at our open PRs yesterday, we had 292 open pull requests. 160 of those were for English. So we are at an unhealthy point of open PRs. Generally, it's good if we can keep PRs for English under 100. That gets a little crowded sometimes around releases, like up to 120 is fairly normal, around like right towards the docs deadline for release. But generally for repo health, we like to keep our PRs for English specifically under 100. And there's really no reason it has to be like over 60 if we can get under that point. I think the last time we had like a 0 PRQ was maybe like a year and a half ago, when Steve Perry was just like, I've had enough. Everything's getting triaged and fixed. And it took like Steve Perry leading a personal quest of vengeance against the PRQ to get to 0. And I think that's the last time that happened. But like 60 is a reasonable number. 100 is definitely like, we shouldn't really be going over that number. So there's your informatics snapshot. All right, so let's talk about docs. So we come back to the year with the conversation about what to do with third-party content. I don't want to call it fresh because it's anything but still as important as ever. Just for a little bit of context, I talked with Jared Bati, who generally is really good at talking sense to me about what to do with sort of big picture issues. And Jared looked at the KEP that we proposed and said, this really shouldn't be up for a KEP. Most of this is things that we can and should be doing. So just really quickly, Brad, I think you very diplomatically tried to give me advice a couple of times last fall, saying this KEP looks like it's too big in scope. If we pull back the scope of what this KEP is proposing, then I think that we may be able to resolve it or they get better feedback. And as it turns out, I agree with you. I think trying to talk about third-party content and dual sourced content and specific policies about what gets vetted is too much for a single KEP. So I have some ideas about how to proceed, but I'm curious what other folks are thinking, if other folks have thought about this over the break. Tim, I know like you've done the heavy lifting for most of this KEP, so I'm curious about like what your particular thoughts are here.
Sure, okay. I guess I can see there's still a problem. Like there was someone who wanted to look at localizing and working on the concept page for service, which is like massive. It is the storage controller of documentation. Sorry, I've just seen Zach's face. Yeah, it's too big. And it's got a lot of vendor content in there. Like it's very relevant to things that are specific to different cloud providers and so on. But you know, I think that page was my motivation for wanting to get involved in that. Basically, because like I want to improve that page, but what does one do? And I've seen other things recently, so it's definitely still relevant. I think it's definitely still needs dealing with. I really like the idea of a smaller, more focused thing that fosters discussion and lets people outside of SIG Docs or who contribute in other ways to have an opportunity to comment.
Okay, so thank you for that. Other thoughts? I know without having the KEP directly in front of us, it's difficult to make specific comments. Maybe you can scope this discussion somewhat. Folks, if we had a KEP that was specifically limited to the question of whether docs should live in tree or out of tree, as Remy Leon put it yesterday, would that be like should third-party docs live in tree or out of tree? Is that a sufficiently well-bounded KEP?
I think we just have to define what third-party docs mean. I think the one thing that people do seem to like that I think did serve us well was all the getting started. So, you know, it seemed okay to have getting started for all the different things because I didn't want to give that up from SIG Docs. You know, anytime I focus on open source, you want to make sure your open source project is really relevant and brings value. An open source project over time that seems to lose that value and relevance becomes not as interesting to people, and you lose a lot of your impact. And so it seemed the way I looked at it was getting started seemed okay because maybe they want to get started with Google, maybe they want to get started with Amazon, maybe whatever. And it seemed like that was enough of a lifeline, and it should be in our docs to help them go. But then then you can see there's places in our docs where we clearly have something that is just so specific to somebody's distribution or somebody's managed service. It's just like, it just seems like a fish out of water, and seemed like, no, that should be in third party, that should be in some docs in their world, if that made sense. So I kind of envisioned it as, well, we had this bridge, you're learning about Kubernetes and you need a launching point to getting started with one of the things. That seemed okay. And then a lot of the other stuff, particularly if it looks like a fish out of water, where only for one distribution do we talk about how to do something. There's some of those throughout the docs in different places that just seem very out of place. And that was kind of the way I thought about it, Zach.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Jim, Jim and Caitlin, anything? Sorry, yeah, go. Anything you want to say?
I don't know if you're covering for me or for Caitlin. I wasn't going to say anything just yet.
No, and I don't think
that's fine too.
I don't have a super strong opinion on this now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is David. It kind of feels like it opens up the floodgates if you do allow third-party content, and I don't know how you would manage all of the flood in a very fair way. That'd be one of my concerns. Is there's so much third-party docs to review, right? It's distributions, it's clouds, it's a lot.
Okay.
And I think I would agree with that as well. I mean, I think we've sort of got some grandfathered content in that we kind of have to deal with. And then we have sort of new stuff going forward. And I think I would agree with you. Certainly for new stuff going forward, we should really worry about third-party content. I don't know how we scope it, define it, but I think we just want to be a little sensitive that we do have some, just historically, they've always done the setup install, and maybe that's the one place where, you're allowed to, we'll keep maintaining it, assuming the right things are done. So if anything bit rots, we're going to remove anything that bit rots. And so if we look at policies and we look at our CAP, we should have a simple statement that says, listen, if something is bit rotting and we are not getting a timely response to whoever would quote unquote be the owner of that content, we're going to pull it out, and not, under the auspice of we don't want other people's content reflecting poorly on us. And
sure. So at this point,
yeah.
I mean, the easiest way to keep something from bit rotting is to never have it there in the first place. The best docs are the docs you don't need.
Agreed.
So I do agree with you that sort of matrix of cloud providers on the getting started page serves a useful function, and it's the one place in the docs that I think is valuable. But at this point, the more that this sort of freshens in my mind in the discussion, the more I think that we're rehashing well-trod ground. So I think at this point that the way forward is to revise that KEP to be very straightforward in scope and talk very specifically about third-party content, about what it takes for third-party content to be included in the docs. There are some components where a third-party solution is required. But being very clear and using the list that Tim put together in the KEP that's open right now as a starting point to go through and say to the page contributors, hey, we're moving this, this content doesn't belong here anymore. We're moving this out of tree. We're willing to work with you to give you a time frame to rehome this content, but it doesn't belong here anymore. And you have an arbitrary period of days, like 90 days. That's enough time to say, find a new home for this content. We're happy to redirect. If you submit a redirect for this content to keep the SEO fresh for yourself, awesome. But to restrict that KEP in scope to figure out what to do with third-party content that doesn't belong there anymore, how to get rid of the old stuff, and how to vet the new stuff coming in.
Yeah. So what I really like about that is you've already
Sorry,
mentally
Brad, just really
started.
quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Tim, and then Brad.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It should be a quick point. I think there's a bunch of stuff where it's sort of how to use Thing with Kubernetes, and it's a useful expository article, like, you know, how to do logging with Kubernetes, and we've used Elasticsearch. The blog is a good place for that, I think, because you can let it rot.
Good point. Brad.
Yeah, what I was going to say is what I really liked about how I interpreted what you were saying was you've already started thinking about breaking the initial cap into more manageable pieces. So the piece of the policy of here's how much time we're going to give you to, you know, get your, move your content out, or before we move your content out, or you're allowed to use a redirect. That piece of setting up the policies for removing the content, I think by itself, standalone, becomes a very smaller cap that I think will be, if we feel we need to get approval from the architecture board or whoever was letting you know the last time, hey, you need our approval. I can't remember who it was. I think it was architecture. That's a more digestible piece. And then in a similar fashion, separating out the other pieces that were in the big cap, I think we'll have more success, you know, being more specific like that, if that makes sense. And then if we can knock off the easy ones, then we can leave the few ones that we're going to get bike shedded on and have a little tougher time. We can kind of defer those and then be able to feel like we made some progress because we took some of the lighter, easier pieces of the cap first and got them approved.
Fair. Okay. Enough about the cap. Let's let's move on. Let's talk about API docs. So yesterday, as part of doing catch-up work with PRs, I was looking at Karen Bradshaw's PR to regenerate the kubectl docs and the API docs, and it's the one. So API documentation in general is the one piece of our stack that is not well put together. It's pretty gross, frankly. We've got an open API spec that's been applied to like the main API docs, and then things are put together and like wrangled with Go generators, and it doesn't need to be as complex as it is. And it's the one piece of our doc history that I don't really know. I don't know why things are the way they are. I assume that folks made the best decisions that they could at the time with what they had, but it's also clear to me that the way that things are isn't the way that they can remain. And I would like to see what we can do about improving that content. But I also don't want to assume that everyone is as dissatisfied with it as I personally am. So I would like to float the idea of getting user satisfaction metrics with our API docs, either by like a survey or like looking at specifically our page analytics for API reference, see how users behave when they're visiting those pages, or some mix of both. I don't know, what do folks think about API docs and about user satisfaction?
Yes, so semi-related, and I don't mean to divert here, but I was talking to a coworker this morning who recently completed their CKA and CKAD exam. And I don't know if everyone on the call is aware, but you can use the Kubernetes documentation while you take the CKA and CKAD test. It's a helpful resource. and the coworker said that the API reference docs and the kubectl reference docs were incredibly invaluable to their CKA and CKAD exam. Not saying the user experience is great, not saying they're widely used and loved greatly, but the value from a CKA exam was something that was not necessarily in my purview when dealing with some of these woes of the API and reference doc generation. My personal opinion on the matter is this should be automated. It should be out of sight, out of mind. I think that this is ripe for, we're taking tools and we're having people build other tools that are building off of other people's tools. And like you're saying, we get into this Pandora's box of a cluster mess. And I think that there might be a way to automate this where docs host the APIs and the reference docs, but we're not necessarily the people responsible for generating and managing that content. Maybe the burden falls on the application owners or the actual binary owners. I'm not, just throwing it out there.
Thank you. It's valuable to know that, at least anecdotally, that that folks are finding it helpful in an applied context, even if that context is like a CKA or a CKAD exam. That's good to know. Other folks, other feedback about either the API docs backend or about the user experience.
I've noticed that like the cross-referencing is really missing. I've seen issues from people saying, I've looked at this API doc and I don't understand this thing. And there's another page that tells them how to do this particular thing, but they're not finding it. And what we'd do with, like Markdown human written documentation is we'd go, you're absolutely right, there should be a link. Here's a what's next link. Good first issue, help wanted, move on. And that mechanism, I think, is going to be, I don't know if people will know that they're missing out on that because, how do you know what you're missing? But I think people are missing out.
It is an unknown unknown. And there's a way to do that in a well-designed, in a well-formed open API spec. There's a way to link to related topics, but we're not doing that. I wish there's a whole host of questions that I would like to know the answers to, like why are API docs in a separate repository? Why are they so complicated to generate? So I'm going to take an action item. I'm going to talk to Steve Perry, and maybe I think Qiming also has a fair amount of knowledge there. But I guess before I do, it seems like a worthwhile place to dig in, but I also, I guess what I would love is a sanity check. Does this seem like a reasonable place to invest a lot of effort that will frankly be invisible? Because there's a huge knowledge burden on it. And if it's not broken in a way that is causing significant user pain, I don't know how worthwhile it is to dive in. So I guess just a really quick up or down, does the API docs seem like a good place to do a deep dive right now? So indeterminate, okay. That's very helpful to know. Yeah, Tim.
If I could pick one thing for people to pile in on, it would be to document a concept we haven't got in the concept section, config map. I believe it's quite an important thing in Kubernetes.
Fair. Okay, so without a strong drive forward on API docs, I'm going to say it's good to be aware of, but I'm not going to deep dive on it until there's a more pressing need. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know Karen's done some really great work on improving the API reference doc generation in the current state that it is today. I would say total thumbs up on Karen's work and the efforts to streamline that process to generate those docs, and Jiming also helping out with that. I encourage that, but I don't know if it's worth the deep dive like you were saying. So that's where I get my maybe, and I just wanted to clarify that I don't think it's worth slowing down the efforts there that Karen is working on to improve that. I think the release lead will then have an easier path to generate those docs, but down the road, definitely I think this is ripe for automation.
Agreed. But yes, yeah, definite props to Karen for making that a much smoother process. That's really valuable work she's doing. Okay, API docs. That's that. KEP process. Jim, I could have sworn you had something in here. Oh, here it is. It's the so this Google Doc that we're currently using for our agenda notes. Jim, please tell us why we need to do something about this.
Yeah, definitely. So every year we've been rolling the docs that we reference for the meeting minutes. And what happens is over the course of the year, it becomes too big to manage, maintain. A lot of folks in the community have issues with them. Historically, we've created a new doc and then started retroactively linking old docs through that process, which has presented some challenges, such as the community repository currently points to the wrong documents. When you go to those Google Docs and you click on the link to go to the current documents, that link doesn't work also. So it starts to get in this kind of mess of multiple links to multiple places for multiple things every single year over and over again. So after chatting with some folks, we had the idea that we would take the base content of this doc and archive it somewhere and then link that archive doc to the SIG Docs channel and hopefully not deal with this mess again.
So that was actually Caitlin's idea, which props to Caitlin for proposing that we create a new doc to archive the contents and then keep the current doc, just basically wipe the slate. So nice bit of engineering there, Caitlin. He's such a cute dog. Oh.
We got a delivery, so it set him off. Now he's made an appearance.
Nice. So Jim, that sounds totally reasonable to me. Does anyone have any strong objection to the timely implementation of well thought out engineering?
Well, when you phrase it like that, no, it sounded outstanding.
Awesome idea. I thought I was the only one who ran into that issue.
Oh,
no, it's
idea.
Really common. Yeah. So okay, cool. Thank you, Jim, for bringing that to awareness, and look forward to a sparkly, brand new, same old doc. Okay. I see, Seth. It looks like you added an agenda item to talk about SIG Docs security. So take it away.
Yeah, just a real quick shout out that Peter Benjamin and I are picking back up the doc security kind of project thing that Zach Arnold started and had to step down from. And then life happened, KubeCon hit, we both started new jobs, and Jim has been incredibly patient in helping us get that set up. So Thursdays, bi-weekly, 9:30 PST, we're just gonna have a meeting to discuss that stuff. And this week's meeting will be the first one back, and we're basically gonna go through the list of pending tasks that were left undone, and kind of introduce ourselves and just kind of ramp back up over the next couple weeks. So feel free to stop by if you'll be around.
Awesome, thank you. It's exciting to see that work pick back up.
Yeah, we don't know if this is going to eventually fold into Docs proper or some another SIG or become a working group or things like that. But there were 4 or 5 tasks that were left undone, and I'm sure we will identify things as we move along. So we don't really have a long-term plan for this in terms of exit or continuing it. We're just going to kind of see what happens. So it should be fun.
you're in that optimal place where you're effective, but not so effective that you need to become a formal working group.
Yep. And I plan on milking that for as long as possible.
Excellent. Okay, I added a quick note about the notes for the SIG Docs quarterly meeting. We had it relatively late last year, and just to make sure that folks get a chance to see and review what we talked about, the priorities that we set for the year and the things that we agreed to look at and tackle first for Q1. And I added that specifically because in talking about whether to prioritize API docs, I'm like, didn't we already discuss this? Did we already set priorities for Q1? Didn't we have a quarterly meeting about this? So this is as much for my own memory as it is for the collective good. Cool. All right, so that's the end of what we have for scheduled items. We've got like a ton of time left. What else would folks like to talk about? Caitlin, I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit and boost a talk that we had at KubeCon in San Diego, where you said that this particular time slot does not work especially well for you, and that you might like to see it changed. I'm not married to this time slot either. Is there something you would like to say about like a new time right now, or do you want to like put a note for next week's discussion? I'm not gonna full on throw you under the bus. I'm just gonna like nudge you towards the bus a little bit.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I find that even just a little bit earlier in the day before all the meetings start taking place would be awesome. Or just a different day of the week. My Tuesdays tend to be very busy, and I feel like Tuesday's a pretty busy day for a lot of people. But I also think it'd be great if we had any flexibility to move it earlier for some of our international time zones as well.
The absolute riveting blackness outside of Tim's window being some indication that this is late for him.
That's actually a blind.
Oh, wow. But if we
but it is also it's black out
there. Nice. Okay. So either earlier or a different day of the week is what I hear you saying, Caitlin.
Yep, those are my two preferences. But I think it'd be great to revisit it with the group as well, just now that we're in a new year, to see what works best for everyone.
Pretty much any time sounds great to me. I would say no Mondays and no Fridays, but early, later, I'm indifferent. So thumbs up.
Yeah, I mean, just if we could either just get a list of choices, because my calendar gets really crazy and I've booked this for the year. I can find other slots, but I just want to make sure we don't pick a slot where I'm like, oh, there's no way I can attend that. I can certainly move stuff around. So if we just have a couple of choices that we can just pick from would help me.
Sounds like a doodle would be really helpful. I'm sorry. Cool.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yep.
I can put that together for next week. Yeah.
Oh my God.
We're on the same page, Zach.
Yeah.
That was like word for word, I think.
I'm going to map each for you to one ear.
What you all didn't notice is I didn't actually say the word doodle pool, because I felt like, oh no, if I say it, then maybe I'm the one who has to put together. But if I kind of hint to it and somebody falls into that trap like Caitlin and says it, look who got the action item. Smarter owl on the branch.
You can all see here now that Brad has years and years and years of experience delegating. I wonder when the last time he did any work was.
Hey, I'm taking the first PR wrangling shift. Hey.
Yeah, you're right.
I'll see you in Amsterdam, Mr. Seth.
I'll have more stickers. I'll be there.
Oh, yeah, I need more.
Yes, this is how you become a distinguished engineer at IBM.
Lots of out of office time?
All righty.
Stepping close to the trap, but not into the trap. All right. Cool. Anything else? All right, then I'm going to call
You
it
mean
in.
literally anything?
No, please allow me to scope that to topics relevant to this general meeting and purpose.
Sure. But I have a docs relevant query, which is like,
excellent.
well, it's a nag framed as a question. But what's happening with diagrams and also with diagram localization?
That is an excellent question. In order to have any knowledgeable discussion of that, I would have to refer to the quarterly meeting notes. So, I'm looking through the quarterly meeting notes now, and I'm going to share my screen while I do it. All right, just content plan, setup, admins, release, accessibility, year-long goals.
You're about there, a bit more.
Diagrams. Oh, that's excellent. So who's driving the diagrams? David Kiperos, Steve Perry, and Shane
Yeah,
Angel.
I told you I've been on the call before.
Indeed. So let's
I've
talk
got a
about
draft
diagrams.
already of the scope of work. That was the what I signed off for. I reached out to someone in my company for an example of a scope of work for marketing stuff, and I have a draft of what I guess is to be sent to a CNCF group for further processing. I don't know who you wanted me to work with or collaborate with to reviewing the draft. Okay.
Yeah, if you reach out, I'm happy to give you my email address, and I'm happy to wrangle all of the funding and contract, actual contract piece on the CNCF side.
Okay, it is just a draft, so I would like some feedback from those on the call or whoever would like to make it even clearer.
Notes. So David, if you want to circulate your draft, I don't know, like put it in a Google Doc and then like link it to the SIG Docs Slack channel. That's probably the best, definitely the easiest way to get review.
That. Yeah, it's already in the Google Docs, so just drop it out there into the wild.
Perfect. This has a draft. We'll send it for review. Is this week a reasonable time?
Yeah, absolutely.
To SIG Docs Slack. Let's see. David will send to send to Zach for CNCF funding. Okay, cool. Excellent and timely question, Mr. Bannister.
Sure, thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right, then I'm going to call it in. That's a SIG Docs meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Thanks, y'all.
All right, thanks. See you.
Thank you. See you next week.